Hi. Hi there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes. Yeah.
Great. And we're recording as well, so sorted.
Brilliant. Awesome. So very nice to meet with you again, Nish. Thank you for awarding me the time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
So after you.
My connection is still a little bit unstable, so I'm going to wait. If we wait 2 minutes, just for it to buffer.
Okay. Does it normally improve in a few minutes?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it kind of has a little bit of a delay, but once the connection is established, it seems to get stronger and stronger as it goes. So
okay. Great.
Okay, so we seem to be connected pretty well now. We can carry on with the meeting, Nish. Thank you.
So I received your questions a few days ago, a week ago. So if you wanted to give a brief intro, and then we can start going through the questions that you sent me.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've been working on the diamond model of relative consciousness since the conference. We've been developing that, and it's taken quite a significant place in my research outcomes. It's been very interesting to have the dialogue with you about the diamond model, and your insights have been incredibly valuable, and I feel that a continuing dialogue about certain aspects of the diamond model is needed. But I also would like to, in line with the questions that I've sent you, I'd like to pick your brains about certain aspects of the work that I've done, and certain aspects of the work that I'm applying to the diamond model, just to see what your insights are and to see what your ideas are about these certain elements that I'm adding as part of this logical system of cosmology. So your insights, as ever, are extremely valuable to me, Nish. Okay, so I'm going to be making the transcript of these interviews, and they'll be put into my dissertation, and I'll be referencing your answers. Okay, so
great, thank you.
You are a guide at this part of my life, and I feel that any insights you can offer me, any understandings that you can add to this dialogue, extremely valuable. Not just for me personally, but academically as well. So I just want to thank you again. I'm immensely grateful. I'll be eternally grateful for these times that you've all.
You're very welcome, and I'm very happy to help in any way that I can.
Brilliant, brilliant. So shall we start with the first question then, Nish?
Yes, let's do that.
So what I'll do is I'll read the questions as I've sent them to you, and then you can have a chance then to give your answers, if that's okay.
Yep, I'll give my answer, and then we can discuss it in more detail. And then when we feel we've done that justice, then we can move on to the next one.
Next one, brilliant. Yes, that would be brilliant. So, question 1. In regard to the diamond model of relative consciousness, there is an element which I added, drawn directly from my research outcomes, called endo-quantum mechanics. Endo simply being a combining form, meaning within. So from my research, it has become evident to me that there are quantum systems operating within our biological systems. So would you firstly agree with endo-quantum mechanics being an appropriate definition for such systems?
Is that, do you want to finish question 1? Because there was a bit more, wasn't there? Or is that all of question 1?
That was the question. That was the question.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yep. I mean, I agree that quantum processes are part of any living organism. They must be, because of the very hierarchical nature of objective reality. So atoms become molecules, molecules become cells, cells become proteins, and so on and so on. And if we go in the other direction, beneath atoms, if you like, we have subatomic particles, which are essentially the domain of quantum mechanics.
Yes.
So what I'd like to do is I'd like to share a screen with you, actually, because I think the 4 quadrants of Ken Wilber's integral theory is actually key to understanding some of the things we're talking about here, and it will help to give a framework to answer some of these questions. So would that be okay?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no problem at all.
Great. So tell me if you can see this.
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Perfect.
So I'll give you a quick overview of what this is. So if you remember in the diamond model last time, we found that if you split up the diamond into these 4 quadrants, we have these 4 different aspects of reality. And these are effectively the 4 aspects of reality depicted here on this diagram. So can you see my cursor moving around?
I can indeed, yes, yeah.
Okay, so this upper left, that's basically the mind. Think of that as the mind.
Yeah.
The upper right is the body.
Okay.
The bottom left is culture.
Okay.
And the bottom right is society. So these are the 4 aspects of reality, which we derived from the one, the many, the subject, and the object last time, if you recall that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Now,
so sorry, would this apply to the diamond model, the way that we've drawn up the diamond model? Would these the upper left, does that pertain to subject? Upper right, does that pertain to object?
Yes.
Lower right, does that? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Yeah,
so
I understand it. Yeah, this visually it applies directly to the model in its kinetics.
Directly to the diamond model. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So the upper left here would be the subject at the level of the whole. So that is the one individual subject. The upper right would be the one individual subject is the mind. And over here, the one individual object would be the body. And down here, you've got the collective now. So the collective or multiplicity of subjects is culture. And over here, the multiplicity of objects is society.
Okay.
So that's how we derive the 4 quadrants. And within each of these 4 quadrants, you can see these numbers going up from 1 to 13. And next to each number, there's a description of something. Now, these numbers represent evolution within that quadrant.
Okay.
So if we start very quickly at upper left, so this is the mind. So you can see here the evolution of the mind. As the mind evolves, we go through prehension, irritability, sensation, perception, then later on emotion, concepts, vision, logic. These are the levels 1 to 13 of how the mind evolves.
Okay.
And we see exactly the same thing in the other 3 quadrants. So in the upper right, we see how the body, or the physical world, if you like, evolves. You've got atoms to molecules, and I'll just skip a few, do it quickly. So you've got your organisms, neural code, brain stem, neocortex, and so on. So this is the evolution of the body and the brain.
Brilliant. Okay.
Down here, you have the evolution of culture. Now, the evolution of culture is basically the spiral dynamics levels that we talked about with all these different colors. So these are the different views and capacities that you can have in culture. So you can start off with physical, vegetative, locomotive, and then you start moving on to world views like typhonic, archaic, magic, mythic, rational. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't need to worry about the details of what they all mean at the moment. We just get the general picture. And then the bottom right over here, this is the evolution of society. So these are the stages that society goes through as it evolves. So right at the beginning, you've just got galaxies, then galaxies contract into planets, then you have living systems, then you start having human beings with, you start with ecosystems, then you start having societies, groups and families, tribes, villages, empires, nations. So this is the way we get the evolution of society. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got these 4 different types of evolution going on in these 4 different quadrants simultaneously. and they happen together. So for example, as you get an evolution of the mind to level 1, at the same time, you're going to get the evolution of the body to level 1, the evolution of society to level 1, the evolution of culture to level 1. So these 4 types of evolution evolve together.
Okay, so the proportional evolution within these quadrants, yeah?
Exactly.
Okay.
So you've got these 4 types of evolution which correlate with each other exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So just to give you an example, just to make this really clear, hopefully, let's say that the time that, let's look at level 6. So, or no, let's look at level 5. The evolution of the mind at level 5 is when we're able to start having sensation.
Okay.
That is the same time that the body develops the neuronal, the body is a neuronal organism, because you need a neuronal organism to have sensation over here. Yep.
That's fair, yeah, complete sense, yeah.
At the same time.
So then the locomotive would apply then to sensation, yeah.
Exactly. And that's the same. That's the same time you're going to get. Exactly. And you can do that with any of these levels. At any point that one of them evolves to a certain level, you'll see the same level happening in the other 3 quadrants. So we call this tetra evolution. Yeah. So evolution takes place across all 4 together at the same time. And you need for evolution to happen in a stable manner in any one quadrant, it has to be supported by the correlate evolution in the other 3.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So this, you can think of all this as being within the diamond. So within the diamond, you've got your 4 quadrants and all these levels of evolution happening at the same time.
Yeah. Okay.
Now your endo-quantum mechanics. Now here your level 1 is atoms, but actually just think that, just slightly below that, imagine you've got a level 0, which is not on this diagram, but imagine a level 0, which would be the quantum level particles at level 0. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And simultaneously, obviously, you'd have some very basic, something happening in the mind, consciousness, even before prehension, something happening in culture, even before the physical, and something happening in social before the galaxies, which would probably be like your quantum potential. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now, your idea of endo-quantum being always present whenever there is a living organism or living consciousness would work here, because what you can see here is that, the other thing I must mention is that as you evolve up these levels in any of these 4 quadrants, the higher levels contain the lower levels as subsets. So
the foundations, obviously, that these other holons are built upon, isn't it? So
exactly.
We wouldn't be able to get to level 7 without having gone through level 5s and level 6s first.
Exactly. So you can't have molecules without atoms. You can't have, organisms without molecules. So you can't have planets without galaxies. You can't have, magic without archaic. You can't have concepts without symbols. The lower is always a subset of the higher. So what you can see here, if you just look at the upper right quadrant, is that the quantum particles at level 0 always have to be there if you're going to have, say, a neural cord or a reptilian brain stem at level 7, which is where your consciousness, your obvious consciousness, is going to start. So that matches what you say, that you must have quantum processes wherever you have consciousness in a living being, because you've got to have level 0 before you can have sort of level 6 or 7, say.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Yep.
That's very interesting.
That is interesting, isn't it?
No. Very much so. Very much so. Wow.
So I would say that what we could do, if you wanted to expand on this diagram yourself, is to add this level 0. So the level 0 in the upper right would be your endo-quantum processes.
Yeah.
The level in the top left, you could call it the ground of consciousness.
Yeah. Okay.
At the bottom right, that would be a quantum potential.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And at the bottom
Because it's
left, yep, because that's just before the Big Bang. So at level
yes,
zero,
yeah, exactly.
and the bottom right would be your quantum potential, which is going to explode into your galaxies. And your bottom
Yes.
left would be, say, your I mean, we'd have to work out what that is. It's not obvious, but that would be the very potential for culture to emerge, a kind of a pre-cultural void. That could be.
Could we put the endoquantum field there? We have quantum potential, then we have the endoquantum field between individuals, because we obviously have the endoquantum mechanics running in our systems. We create the endoquantum field, and then those endoquantum fields can interact.
See, endoquantum field, because it's an objective thing that can be measured, I think would have to belong to the upper right. So are you saying, where are you saying you want to put the endoquantum field?
I was just asking whether you would agree with it being part of either the cultural or the behavioral.
Yeah, I would put it in the behavioral.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would put number 0. We could put endoquantum field or endoquantum particles and field. That whole thing would be 0 there. And I think the cultural equivalent of that would be sort of culture potential for culture. That would be like a kind of a 0 potential for culture to emerge. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Makes sense.
So I think this would answer your question 1. So you've got where we can call it endoquantum. That's fine, and we would show that it's endo by locating it in the context of these higher levels that build up to the brain and consciousness.
Brilliant. Wow. That's very, very interesting, Nishad. Very interesting indeed. So just by the visual kinetics of this this diagram that we've got up here, I could literally add this directly to the diamond model right now, and it would fit in like a missing jigsaw piece.
It would. We'd have to give credit to Ken Wilber, because he's designed the 4 quadrants in this way. But we're plugging these 4 quadrants into the diamond. So you can imagine, if you follow my cursor, you can imagine my diamond going from there down to there, down to there, down up to there, and up to there. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that is then everything that belongs between wholeness and multiplicity, that whole field between wholeness, multiplicity, subject, object, that entire diamond field would contain this whole tetra evolution context.
Brilliant. It's phenomenal to see these things, Nishad. I'll be honest with you. From my research, I was coming from a place in the dark. Slight insights with my autism and slight insights with my experiences. But to see these things now that I can directly apply to the work that we've been developing is really quite phenomenal. I have no other way to explain it other than phenomena, because it is a very, very strange instance for me to have developed my idea and to come across these synchronicities with developments with yourself.
Yes, it is. It's
really,
yeah, I mean, in very different ways and coming from very different places, our work has found this intersection.
Yes, it's a common ground, isn't it?
Common ground, yeah, exactly. And you're starting from design and physics. I started from religion and mysticism, and we've kind of intersected in this place. Yeah.
It just shows the potential for the dialogue between scientists and consciousness researchers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Consciousness theologians. It just shows that there is a place for science in this.
Oh, definitely. And we have to do it that way. Otherwise, spirituality remains at the level of superstition. I mean, my work, the way I see my work is to give spirituality a really strong, rational basis.
A foundation to be built upon, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Right, 1 second, just going to get rid of the dog.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. My dog loves attention.
Okay.
whenever my attention's on something else, he wants my attention, and
All right.
he doesn't let it. So he's out of the room now. He can play with his ball on his own.
Okay.
So that's a brilliant answer to question one, Nishad. Okay. I know that we can directly apply this now to the model even further. I want to thank you for bringing this forward, because I would never have found this on my own. You know, it's another contribution from myself. It's going to take me a while to get into understanding all of these different areas, but from your basic explanation so far, I can see it really does apply. Like I said, like I think so, yes. So that's a brilliant answer to question one, okay? Because it gives me things to move forward with and things to plan with my work. So thank you for that.
Okay, you're welcome.
Move on to question.
Yep, let's do that. Let's do that.
Brilliant. So if my hypothesis is correct, and some form of endo-quantum mechanics is sustaining the conscious experience of the observer along a quantum relative timeline of pure memory, then there should be some form of endo-quantum field produced by the brain. This field would then be a field that should go and interact with that produced by other brains. Would you agree with me that the experiments in the consciousness event with the Cylurons could be measuring that endo-quantum field?
Right. So I think, again, we can get hints towards this by looking at these top two quadrants, the upper left and the upper right. So if we have a look here at, say, anything that we want to measure scientifically, anything that we want to actually detect using instruments of any kind, is going to have to be in this upper right quadrant. Yep. Does that make sense?
Okay, because it's the exterior, yeah.
Exactly. We can't.
Yes,
you can't,
definitely.
Yeah, you can't use instruments to measure emotion or perception. You've got to do your measurement over here in the objective realm, because the subjective realm is hidden from us. It's within that person's own mind. But the way we can measure, the reason we can measure consciousness is because if the upper left is consciousness and the upper right is matter, that's another way of putting it. Instead of mind and body, think of this as consciousness on the upper left and matter on the upper right. Then the reason that
mind and matter.
Sorry. So the reason that we can measure consciousness on the upper left is because anything that consciousness does over here in the top left is going to have a correlate over here in the top right. Yeah.
So we can measure it indirectly.
Exactly. We can measure its correlate. Yes. You can't measure consciousness directly. You can't actually measure consciousness directly, because consciousness is not a thing in the exterior world that has dimensions. Because I mean, you can't measure concepts, you can't measure emotions, but concepts and emotions leave traces over here in the limbic system and the complex neocortex. So what you can do is you can measure the person's brain, and by measuring and seeing changes in the person's brain, you're indirectly measuring what's going on over here in the top left in the person's consciousness. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay.
So what was can you repeat your question again? And then what was question 2 again? Repeat the question 2, please.
Yeah, so would you, okay, so if my hypothesis is correct and some form of endo-quantum mechanics is sustaining the conscious experience of the observer, there should be some form of endo-quantum field produced by the brain. And this should grow and interact with the endo-quantum fields produced by other individuals and their brains. And I find that when I went to the consciousness conference, I found that the Cylurons were measuring the endoquantum field that I've been predicting.
Right.
I got to the endoquantum field aspect as a knock-on logic, like this would actually have to exist if endoquantum mechanics is playing a role.
Right.
And then when I got to the consciousness conference and they had those silerons, I realized that these silerons are measuring the endoquantum field.
Right. Right. Okay.
I realized that they potentially measuring the endoquantum field.
So I would say that we can have a framework for answering that question by looking at the way we can move in a clockwise direction through these 4 quadrants. So we begin in the upper left here, and this is where we find consciousness. So any kind of conscious experience in any one person is going to be movements here in the upper left. And that's going to leave a trace or correlate with measurable brain activity over here in the upper right. And at the very base of that brain activity, right down at level 0 in the upper right, you're going to have your endoquantum field. Yep.
Brilliant, yeah. Okay, so that answer. Sorry.
Now, what I was going to say is that if this is just one individual, that will then, you could have 10 individuals in a room, all of whom are having conscious experiences which involve their brains. At the base of that brain, you're going to have the endoquantum field here at level 0 in the top right. But when lots of individual brains and minds interact with one another, you're going to move down to this bottom right quadrant, because then you're creating a society of brains and minds interacting with one another down here in these different social interactions. And through those social interactions, you're going to create a change in the world views over here in the bottom left of all of those people who are interacting with one another. So I would say the answer to your question is that the endoquantum field in the upper right correlates with, or rather forms the physical foundation of the external correlate of the conscious experience of the individual on the upper left. And when many of these interact with one another, you can see that interaction here in the context of the bottom right, which brings about changes in the bottom left. So that entire movement that you're talking about, which has the endoquantum field as its external foundation, can be thought of as this clockwise movement through from the intentional to the behavioral to the social to the cultural and back to the individual again.
That is a phenomenal answer, Nishad.
Yeah.
It's really phenomenal. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You are giving me answers to questions that clearly only you can answer. Like, it's strange.
Brilliant.
Let's not talk about destinies.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that. That's a really good answer. Okay, very good answer.
Good. I'm glad. Okay, question 3.
Okay, so should we move on to question 3?
Yeah, if you're happy with that, if you're happy with question 2.
Yeah, brilliant. So throughout my models, the hypothesis that... Yes, I am. Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Very
Brilliant.
much so.
Brilliant.
So question 3. Throughout my models, the hypothesis is clear that there are retrocausal aspects to the conscious experience of the observer. I found that this may not only be possible via the endoquantum systems. I have found there is an endoquantum system. If there is an endoquantum system, it would be inherently reliant on a retrocausal aspect. Would you agree with this emergent understanding? If so, why? If not, why not?
Okay, so you're bringing in now the question of time. And most people, when they think in terms of time, think in terms of a linear time. In other
Yes.
words, past becomes present, becomes future. Yeah, that's the way we normally conceive of time happening. But that's actually just a human construction. That's actually a
Yes.
construction of the human mind. So if we look here in the bottom left
It's the observer effect, isn't it? So,
exactly, yeah, exactly. So if we look here at in the bottom left, which is the cultural and the development of worldviews. Now, if we study if we study anthropology and the evolution of worldviews through history, what we find is that if you look around sort of level 9 and 10, which is the archaic and the magical, that's where human beings started to have some kind of understanding of time. But it was a cyclical time at this point. They didn't think in terms of linear time. They thought in terms of cyclical time. So it's spring, then it will become summer, then autumn, then winter, because it was agricultural living at this point. And by the time the next spring came along, it was seen as pretty much the same as this spring. It wasn't any different. You've just come back to the same cycle again. So the idea of linear time, past, present, future, on which notions like retrocausal are contingent, doesn't actually emerge until here, 11, which is the mythic level. So it's kind of at the mythic level here, 11, 10 stroke 11, where historically you start getting linear time for the first time. Yeah. And that correlates in the bottom right to when we started living in tribes and villages and started developing sort of early states and empires. So we went beyond simple agricultural living, and we needed to evolve more long-term ways of understanding time in linear time. Yep. So you've got 10 to 11 magic mythic linear time, 10 to 11 tribal village early state empire linear time. So now let's look at the upper right. This corresponds to the complex neocortex in the brain. So we need to have developed complex neocortexes in the brain to be able to generate the perception of linear time. Yeah. And then look at number 10 over here. That corresponds to concepts. We need to be able to create concepts because linear time is a concept. So linear time emerges when this number 10 emerges at all 4 levels simultaneously.
Yes,
yeah. Complex neocortex creates concepts, creates a magical mythic worldview, and we're living in tribes, villages, states, and empires. That's when linear time originates for the first time. Now, if we just look at the upper right for now, because that's where we're mostly concerned with, if we say that we have to have a complex neocortex in order to create the perception of linear time, then obviously, if you go down these levels, you're going to have 0 endoquantum field. So you have to have the endoquantum field.
Yeah. So then the retrocausal aspect.
Exactly. So your
the retrocausal aspect would be the foundation of linear time as a concept.
Exactly. So in other words, if we want the retrocausal concept needs a complex, needs linear time. Linear time needs a complex neocortex, and a complex neocortex needs all these lower things, including the endoquantum field. So the endoquantum field through evolution generates a complex neocortex, which generates linear time, which generates the possibility of the retrocausal. So again, you've got the endoquantum right at the foundation. So in all 4 quadrants, basically what I'm saying is in all 4 quadrants.
See, now I understand.
Yeah. Level 0 sustains level 10 and 11 in all 4 quadrants. So the quantum in all 4 quadrants, however we want to call it, sustains everything that's going to come afterwards.
Brilliant, Brilliant. That's a very good answer again, Nishad. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, great, great.
If you give me 1 second, I think somebody's at my front door.
Oh, yeah, sure.
1 second.
No problem.
In the kitchen. Sorry about that, Nish.
No problem.
Okay, so that was a very good answer again. Very good answer. I'm starting to realize that the basic understanding of where quantum mechanics is in the diagram kind of knocks on with these explanations for what would be produced by these quantum systems, and it all correlates.
Exactly.
In all areas. Is very, very strange.
Yes.
So moving on to question 4. Thank you for the answer to question 3.
That's great. You're welcome.
Do you agree with me in thinking that the matrix highlighted in the diamond model of relative consciousness works efficiently with the relative consciousness as the interface between all variables?
Okay, so what I'll do, let me stop the share here. And let me find, if you just give me a minute, I will find a picture of the diamond model. And then I can hopefully, we can hopefully look at that question.
Brilliant.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll share the screen and bring up, hopefully, let's see if this works. Okay, can you see that?
It's loading up a second.
Okay.
Yes, I can see that. Brilliant.
Brilliant. So let's just see if this would actually work. Okay, can you see the diamond model?
Indeed, yes. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So I think what we're asking here is that, is there a central sort of organizing principle or coordinating entity that sort of sits in the middle? Where my cursor is, it kind of sits in the middle there.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So let's have a look at both the horizontal and the vertical dynamics here. So
okay,
let's do the vertical one first. So the whole becomes multiplicity through a process of emergence or creation or involution, however we want to call it. And then the whole, if you like, returns back, the multiplicity returns back into the whole through a process of evolution or dissolution. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So now the subject and the object, how do they interact? Well, I think what happens is the subject, if you think of an arrow moving from the subject over to the object, I think that arrow would say structures, because the subject structures the objective world according to its own filters. So we see the objective world, if you like, through the filters of our subject. Yeah.
Okay.
And then once we've done that, the object then sends back information to the subject. So what you've got here is you've got involution going to, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Got involution going down that way, evolution coming up that way. And here you've got structuring going that way and information coming that way. Yep. So in terms of consciousness, I would say this is the, we can call the whole the absolute consciousness. And we can call the subject here the relative consciousness.
Yeah.
And we can call the object here the relative matter or the relative energy.
Okay.
So what's happened is the whole has split into consciousness and matter, or into consciousness and energy. So that's relative consciousness, relative matter, relative energy.
Yes.
So this coordinating principle in the middle here has to be something that coordinates the interactions between consciousness and energy, or between consciousness and matter. Now, it has to also be coordinating the processes of evolution and involution, and it has to be mediating the processes of structuring and information. Structuring and information gathering, or perception, structuring, and information reception. Yeah. Now, what should we actually call that thing? See, I'm inclined to say that relative consciousness should belong over here. I think it's this subject that is the relative consciousness.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand your perspective on that, because that's what I thought in the beginning as well.
Okay.
But from my perspective, with relative consciousness, I see that we wouldn't have the subject or the object without the whole, and we wouldn't be able to get to multiplicity without the subject and the object. So I see these areas as inherently reliant on each other, whichever way we're going, whether it's horizontally or vertically through the matrix. I see them all as inherently reliant. So even though the subject has a relative consciousness, even though that's directly limited to the subject and to us as individuals, I still believe that a relative consciousness is needed between the subject and the object. We don't put ourselves as the subject between our minds and the object. There's something between our mind and the object, making that give and take, or the exchange. You know? So I see that as relative consciousness. Everybody has a relative conscious, and everybody has relative consciousness. And I believe that even the interactions between individuals would need relative consciousness as an interface. You would need relative consciousness. I would need relative consciousness to be able to discuss what my perceptions as a subject in relation to the object would be. I need relative consciousness to then explain how I can gather information from multiplicity and work my way back to the whole. I see the relative consciousness, even though it pertains to the subject and the mind, but when it comes to the kinetics of how the diamond model works, I see the relative consciousness as the central aspect, the interface for that matrix. It is relative consciousness gives us that access to this diamond model in our mind for forming those cosmologies, whether that be in relation to observations of ourselves, or observations of others, or observations in the environment, or within our societies. So I feel that. Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
So, are we saying then that there's two types of relative consciousness in a way? There's the relative consciousness that is the subject.
Yes.
And then there's a relative consciousness that is the interface between subject and object. And in a sense,
Yes.
they're two different things.
They-
They're related. Obviously, they're part of the same process, but we can make a
Yes.
distinction. We can make a distinction between them.
Yes, definitely, yes. So there's the relative consciousness in my brain, and then there's the relative consciousness between us.
Right.
You have a relative consciousness, I have a relative consciousness, and between us, there is a relative consciousness.
So to avoid confusion, is there a way of using a different?
I think consciousness on its own should be applied to subject,
Right.
and then relative consciousness as the interface between everything.
Okay. And then we could, and then object we could call matter stroke energy.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Right.
So subject would then be mind.
Right. Okay. In that
So
case,
there wouldn't
let's.
So there wouldn't be an ability to create a relationship or a point of coherence between the subject and object if there wasn't a matrix between those things,
Right.
giving us the ability to process the information that comes back from the object to the subject, and also process our observations of the object from the subject perspective.
Right. So let's get our terminology precise then. So the whole, let's say the whole is actually beyond consciousness and matter altogether. So we just call the whole the whole. We don't assign
Yes, yeah,
any
okay.
kind of phrase with respect to consciousness or being. Then
Okay.
the whole splits into consciousness over to the left and matter energy over to the right.
Yes.
And you have the interface between the two, which we're calling the relative consciousness.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Yep, that would work. If we're clear about our terms, that would work. So you've got subject consciousness. Okay. Oh, so the whole is just the whole, nothing else. Yeah. Subject is consciousness. Object is matter energy. And the principle that acts as the interface between consciousness and matter energy would be relative consciousness here.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's how I would see it anyway.
Yeah, that's fine.
How I've been.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And then the relative consciousness we could also see as, could we see that also as being an interface between the whole and the multiplicity as well?
And indeed, we definitely can, because without the consciousness of the subject and the relationship between the subject and object, we would never have an idea of multiplicity, and we would never have an idea of the whole. So it kind of works proportionally in its connections, the same way as the matrix for Ken Wilber's.
Right.
We wouldn't have one without the other, so to speak.
Right. So the relative consciousness is the organizing principle that lies at the center of the entire diamond.
For my work, yes, that's the hypothesis.
Right. Okay.
Yes. That is
what I'd like to do is to suggest, and this is something you can research before the next time we talk, because I think it might be useful and relevant. Have you heard of the Eastern notion of the chakras?
I've heard of the chakras, yes,
Yeah,
definitely. Right. I'm not so in tune with the Eastern notion, because all I've ever been exposed to is the Western ideas of chakras.
Okay.
You know,
so chakras is. So what I'll do is, if you give me a second, let me try and find something on the internet.
No worries.
Let me stop sharing this for a moment.
No problem.
And I will find a good diagram here, and I'll explain how this relates to what we're talking about. And it's just another way of looking at it, which might bring an extra dimension to your work on this.
Okay.
Okay, can you see that diagram?
It's loading up a second.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. I can see it there. Brilliant.
Right. So now the chakras originally come from Hinduism, in India, and basically these are said to be 7 energy centers that go up the body. There's one at the root, one sacral, which is the lower stomach, one solar plexus, which is the stomach area, the heart area, the throat area, the third eye in the forehead, and the crown at the top of the head. And these are said to be energy centers that run up and down the body. Now, and each of these, if you see, they each actually, and we don't need to go into this today, but each of these actually corresponds or correlates with a level of evolution. You know, those 13 levels that were going up each of those 4 quadrants. These 7 are actually another way of going up those 13 levels.
Okay.
So now what the Indian tradition and the spiritual traditions in the West as well teach is that this interface between the subject and the object that we're talking about, that we're calling relative consciousness, is actually held or located in these chakras. It's these chakras that form the interface between the subject and the object, and between the one and the many. So the one is the crown chakra at the top there, and the many is the root chakra down the bottom there. So you can see that these chakras are the path from the one and the many, and they're also the interface between the mind and matter. So any information coming from the matter into the mind, or any structuring process that the mind engages in when it's trying to understand matter, has to go through these chakras. These chakras are the gateways between mind and matter, between subject and object.
Okay.
So these chakras represent the different aspects of what we're calling relative consciousness. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Misha, that's phenomenal. I would never have made that connection. Personally, I would never have been able to make that connection myself.
But can you see how that would make sense? They're kind of halfway in. Yeah, they're kind of halfway in the subject because they belong to the body and the energy, but they're also kind of halfway in matter because they're energetic centers that we can measure. So these chakras are the 7 aspects of what you're calling relative consciousness, and they run up the spine according to the esoteric traditions, and they correspond, actually, the nervous system is up the spine. So that relative consciousness is really the nervous system that we can model using these 7 chakras.
My days.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. Very interesting indeed.
So if I now go back, sorry, go on.
It's mind-boggling. I can't believe how these things are aligning.
It all fits. Everything fits together. The theory of everything. That's what we're working towards here.
Indeed, definitely.
We're both motivated in the same way. We both want to find how it all fits together. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
So if I now share the screen again for my diamond model, and then we can see where the chakras would go on that.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah.
So the chakras would basically run up and down here between the whole and multiplicity, where my cursor is going.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So that diamond, the whole subject, object, multiplicity, think of that diamond, it's shaped like a diamond. That's actually the human body.
Yes, yeah, and that's how I saw it when I first saw the diamond model on the screen in the conference.
Exactly.
That's how I saw it. It just made sense to me that way, you know. It just speaks that to me.
So each one of us, you, me, everybody else, we're all diamonds. We're all just in instances of this diamond. We're all examples of this diamond.
Yes, yeah, or manifestation of the diamond in some form.
In some form, exactly. And if we take that manifestation to correlate with the physical body, then what we have is the top of the head is going to be the hole there, You're going to have your spine running down the middle there, and you're going to have the base of the body at multiplicity there. And your 7 chakras that run up the spine that we just saw in the previous model are going to be running up this middle of this diamond here. And
so I'm going to add those diamonds.
Yeah. And those 7 chakras running up the middle there is relative consciousness. What you're calling relative consciousness is those 7 chakras running up and down there. Okay. And depending on which chakra you're centered on, that will give you a different kind of experience of the world, because the world is being structured in a slightly different way and filtered in a slightly different way. So your spine, your nervous system going up and down there, modeled along which your chakras run, is your relative consciousness. And those chakras structure and coordinate everything, the whole becoming the part becoming the whole, and the subject and object interrelating.
Wow.
Yep.
That is phenomenal. I never thought I would find that kind of relationship between Hinduism and my hypothesis, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it blows my mind. It blows my mind. These are ancient ways of thinking, ancient ways of forming cosmologies, and I seem to have created a system which obviously relies on these ancient things, these ancient explanations, and I love that. I really love that, because the best developments in the history of man have been based on history, and what we've done in our history. We need to take 2 steps back, 2 steps forward. We need to take 1 step back. We always need to look at history, and I feel like this is just it's a diamond within the diamond, so to speak.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Wow. Okay.
Great.
So that's given me some brilliant insights. Now I have some new aspects to add to our diamond model.
Yeah. And you know, if you get time, spend an hour just reading about chakras and things, and you'll see how it all fits really well together. Also, if you do a Google on esoteric anatomy, you'll get stuff on that, because our anatomy is our usual anatomy on the outside, but at a more subtle level, we've got an esoteric anatomy, which includes these chakras and the underlying energy.
Okay, yeah. So our physiology isn't as cut and dry as you would see it, basically. There's obviously these underlying principles, and they're measurable and quantifiable.
So your physiology is your gross anatomy, and your chakras are is the subtle anatomy. Okay, and it's that subtle anatomy is where you will find this relative consciousness. It's at the subtle level. Yeah.
Brilliant. So that answers the question perfectly.
Brilliant. Now, before we go to, I think we've done 4 questions. Can you see me okay, or do I need more light here?
I can see you fine, yeah. Okay, I can see you fine.
Okay. Great. Well, we're halfway through, and we've already done some great stuff here.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm so excited. I get more and more excited the more you share with me, Nish. It just gets more and more interesting, more and more exciting. And we come to a very important question now, okay? We have to obviously apply the scientific method, because we're relating science to this idea of consciousness. So, very important question. Are there any perceived limitations to Wilber's theories or contradictions that I should be considering when applying aspects of this integral theory to my or our work? Are there any perceived limitations of this? Are there any roadblocks between this and an ultimate understanding, you know?
I mean, I think, to be honest, those aspects of Wilber's model that we're using here, which is basically the 4 quadrants and the levels of evolution in those 4 quadrants, and how they tetra evolve. I think that's all pretty solid stuff.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
There is evidence that, you know, the mind, body, culture, and society operate according to slightly different rules. So we can't just lump them together. We do have different disciplines already in academia that deal with these 4 quadrants differently. So we have psychology, for example, studying the top left. We have physics studying the top right. We have sociology studying the bottom right. And we have anthropology studying the bottom left. So obviously these 4 quadrants have already been distinguished correctly in mainstream culture. Yeah. And as for these different levels,
okay. So that means that
So, and as for these different levels that evolve within these different quadrants, again, I think there is ample evidence that these developments go on in all 4 quadrants in the way that Wilber has defined them to be. So I think, I mean, there are some more controversial aspects of Wilber's work, but that doesn't come under the way we've used it. That's more
philosophical, maybe.
Yeah. The way that we're using Wilber, which is the quadrants and the levels, I think we're on very, very solid ground.
Brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant answer to that question. Thank you very much indeed. Brilliant. So
no problem.
That means that I'm going to carry on reading with Wilber. I'm going to try and verse myself in integral theory, just so I can get a more solid base understanding and an identification with that kind of theory myself as well. So that's just highlighted more reading that I need to do, definitely.
Brilliant. So my suggestion would be, there's a book by Ken Wilber called A Theory of Everything.
Okay.
That's the one I would recommend you get and read, because that will give you a good overall primer of the whole theory.
Brilliant. Okay, so Ken Wilber, A Theory of Everything.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Nish. I appreciate this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So can we move on to question 6?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Okay, so my observations of consciousness and my ideas from consciousness have come from what I'm explaining is an anomaly in my memory function. Okay, I've been able to see through my future self's eyes, at things that are certain to happen no matter what I do before them. This is just how it is. It's a certain form of determinism. I don't know whether it's because I look that it becomes certified or whether I'm having this anomaly. But a very important question. Would you agree that an anomaly in someone's memory function could only be appropriately identified by that individual?
Yes. And the reason, again, we can explain why I agree with you, again, by looking at the 4 quadrants. So, can you see that?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Okay. So basically, whatever you're experiencing as a first-person mind, the anomalies and anything else you're experiencing, is going on up here in the top left.
Yeah, okay.
Now,
so obviously that has correlates in every other quadrant.
It has correlates in every other quadrant, but the other 3 quadrants don't have direct access to what's going on in the upper left.
Yeah.
So in other words, some other person, if you're talking to your friend who's over here in the bottom right because you're engaging with him socially, or in the bottom left because you're engaging with his mind, he or she or they cannot possibly comment directly on what you're experiencing up here in the top left.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So even though there are correlations, there isn't a direct access to any one quadrant from any of the other 3. You know, that's why our private thoughts and experiences remain private, because the other 3 quadrants can't get access to the upper left.
Makes perfect sense.
Yep. And not only that, but even if somebody looks at does a brain scan of you while you're thinking about something, so they're looking at the upper right, which is the brain scan, even if they look at the brain scan, they can't actually tell exactly what you're actually thinking. Yeah, because the upper right, they will get correlates. So for example, I'll give you a concrete example. Let's say you're sitting there and you're having a brain scan and you're feeling really angry about something. Yeah. So in the upper left, you're experiencing anger. And in the upper right, the brain scan will show something that correlates with anger.
It wouldn't directly identify anger, would it?
Well, it wouldn't be able to. It wouldn't be.
You'd have to draw the comparison between the correlates, wouldn't you?
Exactly. So that the scientist, the doctor who's looking at your brain scan, can say, "Oh well, Kai is really angry about something," but he wouldn't be able to tell you from looking at the brain scan what it is that you're angry about. That only you know because it's in the upper left. Yeah. So yes, I agree. You can only access first person anomalies and other experiences through the first person. And the second, third, and fourth, you'll have correlations, but they can't tell you what you're actually experiencing unless you tell them. There's no other way for them to get to that information because they're existing in different quadrants.
Brilliant. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Answers the question perfectly. Thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Okay, so when on the topic of these anomalies, would you agree that an anomaly in conscious awareness, if appropriately identified as an experimental anomaly, could potentially offer insight then into the nature of the consciousness? Do you believe that an anomaly, as I'm explaining, could be giving me this insight? Do you believe that? Do you agree with me that without the anomaly, none of my work would exist?
I think that if there is an anomaly here in the top left, we will see correlations of that in the top right, which can be measured experimentally. And that correlation between the top left and the top right, which we can measure, we can experience the top left, but we can measure the top right. That correlation would make it possible for us to get an insight into the nature of consciousness through experiencing the top left and measuring the top right.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Perfect answer. That was obviously I thought we were going to be sat here for a good 15 minutes trying to get to the bottom of that, but that is really straightforward. Fair. Okay. There's so much to take in.
Yeah, we'll have to watch this video a few times and really think about it. Yeah,
yeah, definitely, yeah.
Damn good job. Damn good job we recorded this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Okay, so we're on to the last question that I sent you now, Nish.
Okay.
Okay. I feel a bit overwhelmed from the insights that you've given me today already. So I feel like we've spent most of our time collaborating and talking about how I see your work and how powerful it is as a system. What value do you find in the work we have created together through this collaboration? I know it's a personal question, so if you decline to answer, there's no problem at all. But
no
what
problem.
value do you find? What value do you find in the work we've created together? And is there anything about the work that we've put together that you think I should consider changing at this stage?
Okay, so I think the work that we're doing together is very valuable because what you've done is you're taking the first steps to applying the diamond model to physics and consciousness, basically. And okay. That's the first independent work anyone's done on that apart from me. You're the first person who's been working on the diamond model and using it apart from me in this way. Okay. I mean, more recently now that I've got there's some people applying it to business organization, which I'm going to be talking to them in a few weeks. But you were the first to start using this in some application, and that is physics and consciousness, which I think is extremely valuable work.
Thank you.
What I would say, and has the potential to be very, very important, I think, and bring the diamond model and your own insights to, hopefully, to a wider audience, and then other people can come along and build on it further.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
So if I go back to the picture of my diamond model, I'll tell you two things that I think are very important, one of which we've covered and one of which we haven't covered yet, but I think we could, because I think it'll add an extra dimension to your work as well. So the first is here, if you can see the diamond model there.
Yeah, I can see it.
What we did last time is to show how the 4 quadrants can be derived from the diamond.
Yes, yeah.
So if we draw a line down there and a line across there, you've got the I, the we, the it, and the its. So these 4 domains of reality can be generated from these 4 basic variables that define the diamond here.
Yes. Yeah.
But what's also, I think that from that was an important part of our first conversation. What we've done today is to look at the 4 quadrants in this form. So we've got our 4 quadrants that make up the diamond, and we've got the levels of development that tetra evolve across these 4 quadrants in this way, and the various implications of that because this diagram has been useful in answering most of today's questions.
It has, yeah, indeed. Yeah. Indeed it has, yeah.
I would say the next thing to consider and to think about is how do these 4 quadrants inform the different ways in which relative consciousness can get valid knowledge about reality?
Okay, that's a brilliant question, Nishad.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant question.
And one way of doing that is to look at the type of knowledge that each quadrant gives you. Because each quadrant gives us a different type of knowledge. And that leads me to this diagram over here.
Oh, wow, I've been seeing you post about this.
Yeah. So this is basically, if you think about this, that's your upper left, which is your mind. That's your upper right, which is your body. That's your lower left, which is your culture. And that's the lower right, which is the social, the society.
Yeah.
And for each of those quadrants, there are 2 different ways in which we can get knowledge of reality. One is by knowing reality from the inside. In other words, what does reality feel like when we experience it? And that inside is inside these 4 circles. And then there is, what would that quadrant look like if we measure it from the outside? And that's what these 4 outside ways of knowing are. So I'll go through each of these 8 very quickly so you get what they actually mean. So we've got 8 zones here, and that we generate the zones. So we start off with nothing, and then we have the whole up there, the multiplicity down here, the subject over there, and the object over there, which gives us 4 quadrants.
Yes. Yeah.
And then for each quadrant, we have an inside and we have an outside, which gives us 8 zones.
Yes. Yeah.
Each of these zones is a particular way that we can study and find out valid knowledge about reality. There's 8 different ways human beings can explore reality, corresponding to these 8 zones. So I'll go through each of these one by one. Zone 1. So this is what does your mind feel like? What does consciousness feel like from the inside? So this is called phenomenology, and phenomenology is the science of experience, or the philosophy of experience. Phenomenology is the study of what it is like to experience things, and that is a proper science and philosophy. So that is the inside of the first quadrant.
Okay.
If we study the mind from the outside, or if we study consciousness from the outside, structuralism. Structuralism is a field of psychology that looks at the different ways in which the structures of the mind evolve or coexist, and how these different structures of the mind give us different interpretations of reality. That's structuralism.
Okay.
So to study the first quadrant gives us phenomenology inside, structuralism outside.
Okay.
So now let me go down to the bottom left. So this is culture. Culture. So what is culture from the inside? What does culture feel like? That's hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the study of how we interpret things. So
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Culture is all about interpretation. We've got shared values. You know, you've got 100 people living in a village, and you have a shared, agreed cultural agreement of how you're going to understand things. The study of those kind of cultural understandings is hermeneutics.
Okay. Yeah. Consensus,
then,
basically.
Yeah. And then the study of culture from the outside is ethnomethodology, which is basically sociology. Sociology means we're studying how culture actually works, but we're studying it as scientists from the outside. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this is the one that's going to be top right, will be the most familiar, I think, to you, zone 5 and 6. So zone 5 is matter, the physical world from the inside. So autopoiesis is the study of how matter, physical objective matter, can organize itself into more and more complex systems, into more and more complex forms, rather. Yeah.
Yes.
And the cognitive sciences are a branch of that, because that would be applying autopoiesis to the study of the brain.
Yes. So would I be right in thinking that because of that autopoiesis, and because we're looking at that aspect of matter, that then we come to that area of Wilber's 4 quadrants, where we're looking at empiricism and scientific observation and things we can measure indirectly towards the other quadrants as correlates?
Yes, exactly right. Yes, from the inside. Yes. I mean, zone 6 would also contribute to that. Yes. Because zone 6 is how we would measure the physical world and study it from the outside. That's basically science, what we call science.
Science, yeah. Yes, the scientific method, everything about it. Like, it's science, isn't it?
So physics would belong to zone 6. Yep.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah.
And then finally, you've got zone 7 and 8, which is the interobjective or social quadrant. So if you want to study that from the inside, you get social autopoiesis. So that is, how does society organize itself and evolve from the inside?
Okay, yeah.
And then you've got systems theory, which is how do these complex systems look and can be measured from the outside?
This is an aspect of systems theory in itself, isn't it? This whole diagram is an aspect of systems theory in itself.
Yeah, in part, yeah. The way we're doing it is, really the way we're doing it is a mixture of the 4, well, really there's aspects of all 8 in the way that we're doing this.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I was about to say that now. I think everything that we're doing relies on all of these areas. Yeah. Which helps, because we're looking at a theory of everything, isn't it?
Exactly,
it makes sense that all of these things would be codependent, correliant, and that we can make these correlates between these things because one relies on the other, and they have symbiosis.
Exactly. They all arise together, they all influence each other. To be really brutally honest, they're all aspects of the same thing. We differentiate them so that we can talk about them. But really, this is just reality emerging together and tetra-evolving together. So this is what we can call an integral epistemology. So epistemology is the study of how we can get knowledge about reality. And this is an integral epistemology because it integrates all the different ways, the 8 different ways that we can get valid knowledge of reality, of which empirical science is actually just one of those 8.
Yes, yeah.
People often
That
think
makes
that's
complete
the
sense.
only one, but that's actually just zone
Yeah,
6.
people, obviously a lot of people focus on empiricism and they focus on the empirical evidence, and there's obviously all of these other areas to consider when we're talking about the emergence of reality in our minds and
Exactly.
the emergence of reality to experience. That is phenomenal, Nishad. I need to apply this to the diamond model, and I need to do some reading and write about this as well, because this, like you were saying now, this creates that epistemology, and the epistemology is how I test this idea.
Exactly.
Isn't it? It's how has this become knowledge? Is it knowledge? What is the nature of this? What is the nature of it to know? What kind of insights or opportunities could it give you to understand this? And yeah, there's so many questions that come from it. I could bumble on for forever about it right now, but it's given me more to read about, really.
Exactly. And one possible route forward would be to ask yourself, is there a way to test the validity of the work that you're doing in all 8 zones?
Oh, then.
Yeah. Because then you've really proven the validity of your work from every possible angle.
That is very interesting, Nishad. So
maybe that will be your maybe that's your PhD. To
yeah, maybe so.
Because that's a very big subject, isn't it? I mean, you could spend a lot of time looking at each of these 8 and seeing how each of these 8 play into. I mean, can we validate the model, the diamond model, and the model of relative consciousness through each of these 8 zones? Because that's the only way we'll know if it really applies across the board.
Okay, yeah. So that's what we need to do next. That's what I need to do next.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's thousands and thousands of words. That is, Nishad.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that may not be possible in this current master's, but maybe in a future, maybe in your doctorate or something.
It shows the way forward, doesn't it? It shows what to do next, and obviously that it obviously validates what we've done so far as a foundation to build on for further study and further research.
Because I'm telling you quite seriously, that would be very original, because not many people are doing this kind of work. Not many people are even aware of these different types of epistemology and a theory of everything, and how to test the theory of everything against all 8 epistemologies.
It's not common knowledge, is it? It's
no. I mean, there's very few people in the world doing this kind of work. But this is the way forward. Look forward 100 years. This is what human beings are going to have to evolve into if we're going to really understand things.
I would really agree with that as well. Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Nishad. You haven't just helped me with my master's now. You've given me steps forward for my PhD.
Brilliant.
And that is phenomenal. Your insights have offered me so much. I'm not sure whether I should start paying you, because I pay the university thousands of pounds a year, and they haven't been able to offer me any kind of insights like this. All they give me is processes and systems and loops to jump through, and I never actually get this kind of valuable insight, and I've achieved it from you. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak.
You're very welcome, and I'm really happy that someone out there is doing academic work at the master's and doctoral level using my diamond model as one of the important aspects of that work. I think that's a huge reward for me in itself, really. That there's at least a handful of people taking.
You're very welcome to that, because I honestly believe your work is genius, Nishad. Okay, there are so many correlations between the way I naturally think about these things based on the anomaly that was in my mind, and there's so many common ground points that we've managed to achieve just by explaining and talking about these things. And I know that I wouldn't be at my level of understanding with this or my level of planning to go forward without you. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And it's great to work in this way and to have a serious high-level conversation as well with you at this level, because
yes,
yeah, this is good stuff. This is advanced good stuff.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So that's the end of the questions, Nishad, for
Okay,
this particular meeting.
Let's see if I can stop.
Thank you so much.
Shall I pause the recording?
Before you stop.
Okay.
Before you stop the recording, I just want to ask you on the camera while it's recording, do I have your permission to use the transcripts from this meeting in my dissertation?
Yes, you do.
Brilliant.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely,
you so much.
yes.
As long as I got that permission and it's on record. So yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. No, use the transcripts.
Yeah, I think we can stop the recording there.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant.